So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nathan Workington, and I'm the Energy and Environment Analyst at the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers. And I'm going to start us off by introducing the next set of speakers. So first up, we'd like to introduce Kirsten Grant. Kirsten completed her BSc from the University of Guelph in Environmental Science. Her research is now focused on subsurface phosphorus transport in agricultural soils in southern Ontario. So this work is investigating how moisture and temperature conditions, as well as soil type, influence the movement of phosphorus through the soils, through the soil profile and delivery to tile drains. Kirsten?
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction. So I am Kirsten, and I am currently doing my Master's of Science with Dr. Marion McCrae at the University of Waterloo in the Biogeochemistry Research Group. Today I'll be talking about a small project that's part of my MSc work. I'll be presenting on phosphorus movement in frozen and unfrozen soils under no-till management with different fertilizer application strategies. So the goal of this work was to investigate interactions between infiltrating water and the application of fertilizer, and to look at how that interaction influences nutrient losses over the non-growing season. So we really wanted to look at how things like soil temperature, so whether the soil is frozen versus unfrozen, and fertilizer placement, whether it's surface broadcast or subsurface band, how those two things combine to influence the movement of water and phosphorus through the soil profile in no-till soil columns. So the methods of this project, to do this, we kept soil monoliths in a temperature-controlled chamber, seen here. We applied fertilizer to these soil tanks and then subjected them to a series of 6 non-growing season events, including rain on frozen and unfrozen ground. And then from these events, we collected leachate samples and analyzed them for soluble reactive phosphorus in the lab. So the main takeaway message, our findings, the short take-home message here is that we found enhanced soluble reactive phosphorus losses from the broadcast tanks compared to those that received banded fertilizer applications, and this trend persisted over all of the simulated non-growing season events. So this tells us that the banded application resulted in more phosphorus being retained in the soil over our simulated non-growing season. If you're interested in seeing any of the data behind this or want to ask me questions, I'm happy to chat with you at my poster after these couple of presentations. Thanks.
Yeah, so we'll hold off on questions. There will be an opportunity to go around to the posters and ask any of the presenters any questions that you might have. Next up, we'll have Lorna Murison. Lorna has an undergraduate degree in environmental studies from Bishop's University and a graduate certificate in geographic information systems from Niagara College. She has previously worked as a GIS analyst at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Dorset Environmental Science Centre. She currently works for Credit Valley Conservation in the Water and Climate Change Science Division doing real-time water quality monitoring. Lorna?
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the hotspot identification tool for sediment loss. And this is a tool that looks at both the subwatershed and field scale and finds the areas that are most vulnerable to soil loss through gully erosion. So I'll just quickly go over why we did it, what it is, and how it works. So why we're doing it, some of the earlier presentations touched on the water quality impacts of excess nutrients. But it's in everyone's best interest to avoid scenarios like what you see here. Farmers obviously want to keep soil and nutrients on the fields, and anyone concerned about water quality wants to make sure that they stay on the fields and out of the water to avoid scenarios like what you see here. So in the spring when the land is bare, it's vulnerable to gully formation like what you see here because you have lots of precipitation and increased runoff from snowmelt. The soil that's lost from these fields, along with the nutrients that they carry, make their way into the nearest creek or water body and can cause things like the algae blooms that you see here. So this is what we're trying to avoid by creating this tool. So what the results look like is a map like this. This is showing the subwatershed that we looked at, which is the East Credit River, which is in the town of Caledon, mostly under agricultural land use. This is an example of the subwatershed scale map that you get, which ranks the regions of the study area based from very low vulnerability to gully erosion to very high vulnerability. So low vulnerability in blue, high in red. So this allows you to hone in on the specific vulnerable areas and target your restoration practices or your best management practices to those areas where they will have the biggest impact. So how we did it, we looked at two main factors, the first based on topography and the second based on the soil type. So the topography has a big role to play in the likelihood of gully erosion. Anything that causes the water to move rapidly and have more power as it flows across the landscape will increase the vulnerability of the land. So things like a higher slope will cause the water to flow faster. A larger drainage area will mean that a larger volume of water is flowing across with more power. So we ranked the entire subwatershed looking at just topographic features, and then we looked at just the underlying soil type. So this was mentioned earlier as well in some of the earlier talks. The soil type has a big impact on the erodibility. Clays will tend to, are easier to be carried away than something like sand, for example. So we also ranked a study area looking at soil type. And we combined both of those rankings to come up with an overall vulnerability of the study area. You can also use the tool, and you'll have to have a look at the poster to see the results of this, to identify on the farm scale specific lines where gullies have the potential to form. And the takeaway message from this is that once you've identified these vulnerable areas, there are fairly simple management practices that can be put in place to reduce the vulnerability. This tool identifies the vulnerability of the underlying land, but there are things that can be done to reduce that, like reducing your tillage, having cover crops, and then maybe looking at more engineered practices like grassed waterways or tile drains. Thanks. I'll be over at my poster if you have any more questions.
All right, and last but not least, we'll have David Columbus. David is a water resource technician with the Watershed Management Group at Credit Valley Conservation. He's responsible for maintaining CVC's real-time water level, climate and rainfall stations, as well as collecting high water and low water flows to support the flood forecasting and warning group. Prior to CVC, he was employed in the consulting world, assisting with similar flow and rainfall studies. David?
Thanks. So as Nathan mentioned, I work for Credit Valley Conservation. I'm here to talk about our real-time monitoring network. Just a really quick outline of what I'm going to talk about. So our historical network, current real-time network, the types of data we collect, and why we collect that data. So our historical network, so pre-2013, Credit Valley Conservation maintains 6 stream flow gauge stations, 6 rain gauge stations, 1 climate station, and 4 water quality gauge stations. And at the time, it was determined that for a watershed of our size, we were seriously lacking coverage in some key areas. Particularly in the northern part of the watershed, our stations were really spaced out. And in the southern part of our watershed, we had a different issue in terms of we were heavily relying on partner data, and we were facing issues such as unreliability, the timeliness of which we could access that data, and some of the data quality. So in 2013, we vastly expanded our network. You can see the outline of the watershed boundary here and all of our monitoring stations. So currently now we have 31 stream flow gauge stations. We have 13 rainfall stations, 5 climate stations, and 11 water quality gauge stations. And I'll just go through quickly what each station measures. Our stream flow stations provide real-time water level values, which can then be used to predict real-time flow, which is obviously important for flood forecasting. We have 13 rainfall stations, which consist of tipping bucket rain gauges and air temperature sensors. We have 5 climate stations. These are a more whole host of sensors, including tipping bucket rain gauges, temperature sensors, barometric pressure, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, and solar radiation. Currently, one of our climate stations has soil moisture sensors. We are working on expanding that to at least 1 station in each region of the watershed. And finally, we have 11 water quality stations, which provide real-time levels for a whole host of water chemistry, including dissolved oxygen, pH, chloride, water temperature, and air temperature. All of our sites are real-time, and they provide data every 15 minutes to our website with the option of manually going in and accessing the site up to the minute. All of our sites are solar powered, so they require no external electrical power. So why is CBC interested in collecting real-time data? The main reason is a mandate of a conservation authority to measure high and low flow conditions. Specifically, I can speak to this past year where there was a lot of really high rainfall events. So it's important to collect high flows in order to better learn how to predict and warn communities about flooding events in a timely manner. The data we collect is used in calibration and validation of hydraulic models and to help updating floodplain mapping. Our real-time data is also used in watershed report cards, watershed, sub-watershed studies, and it's also important in studying the impact of urbanization and climate change. And something that we've just introduced as of this year, all of our real-time data is now available on our website. So this is obviously a very important tool and is something that's really useful for the average everyday person. It's great for scientific information, education, and even recreational uses. For example, we get a lot of calls from people who are looking to fish in the Credit River watershed, and they are looking for, say, levels or turbidity levels in the stream. So we always direct them to our website, which has all of that information posted. So that's it. Thank you very much.
I'd like to call back up the 3 speakers and present them with a little token of our appreciation, and we can give them one more round of applause.